Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. I am Mark. I'm joined by my good friend Christopher. How you doing, Christopher?
I am actually really good today. Thanks. Apparently a sinkhole opened up in the road upstairs. How good is that?
That's so good.
It's proper 2012 pattern.
Yeah.
Mind you, 2012's been and gone. We need a new Aztec or Incan...
Some Nostradamus, like apocalypse, yeah.
Which of the apocalypses predicted a sinkhole in the middle of Sauchiehall Street? I mean, there's a sinkhole in the middle of the live music industry in Sauchiehall Street, so maybe this is just a manifestation of that. Yeah.
Oh, seamless.
Hey.
Seamless. Nice.
You'll not get 20% of the audience tuning out at 5 minutes this week.
You won't, no, you will not.
Thank you, Spotify.
So, in this week's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about the live music scene and the sinkhole in the middle of it.
Right. So, folks, to give you a little bit of background here, every so often I get these texts from Mark that are like, I want to do a show about this, and almost without exception, my arse goes. And the thing is, on this show, I've somehow got the reputation for being the shit stirrer. That's not true, right? See, when the shit really needs stirred, it's Mark who does it.
Yeah, like, I kind of get
I mildly stir the shit at a low level background hum of stirring. You occasionally just wade in there and just kick things a bit. So like you did on Instagram this week. So people out with the Glasgow milieu, well, will likely not be aware of the fact that there was a wee bit of a kind of conflagration.
Good words.
It's a good word. Around an article that was published in Glasgow. And this just sort of lit a wee fire under Mark. I don't know if he'd had a couple or...
No, I hadn't actually. Totally sober.
But yeah, he went for it. And then he contacted me, and when the fucking bat phone started flashing, I knew that there was trouble afoot. But we've done it. We're going to do an episode on it. But before we get to that, Mark, we've got some admin.
We have a Patreon. If you're a big fan of the show and you want to support it, please do that. It's patreon.com/unsungpod. It's £4 a month, or whatever your local equivalent currency is. And for that, you get episodes a few days early, you get some bonus stuff. Sometimes we occasionally write. I sense there's some writing coming out the back of this episode.
There's a lot of writing coming into the front of this episode.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot around this, I think. And yeah, you get to actually chat to us and influence episodes as well, which I think is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, we take suggestions. We do act on some of them from time to time. If you are stumbling across this because of some notorious physical confrontation that took place on the back of it that you've heard about, and this is part of some mammoth thread that ensued after I got lamped by the St Vincent Street. Mind him own business. Some random millionaire clocked me with his Porsche. If that's how you got here, then we as a podcast have literally hundreds of previous episodes that you may also like as we noise people up.
Almost 9 years worth.
Yeah, and my next of kin could probably do with it.
I can also replace you with an AI, I guess, just with all your recorded voice. So.
Absolutely. But yes, also I'd like to add a trigger warning at the start of this episode, specifically for Jeff Ellis.
Oh my God, you started already?
And we will put up a complaints number that you can call as opposed to us personally. Yeah, we'll need to eliminate the public on this now. We've danced about it too long, right? So please, if you like the show, if you enjoy the patter, go and investigate a little bit more about our back episodes. We have addressed these kind of things somewhat in the past. We don't usually get as specific as this because we have lives to live, and we all sort of kind of like to play music, and actually doing this kind of thing is extremely detrimental to your opportunities in a city like this.
And Sanny.
In a goldfish bowl. It's stupid, it's foolish, it's self-destructive, isn't it, Mark?
Very much, so yes.
You think about that when you go back and reread those messages at my funeral, all right?
Read them in your obituary.
But so this episode, to cut to the chase, let's get going, it was inspired by an online Rammy that is specific to Glasgow and specific to one company and even really one venue here in Glasgow. However, Glasgow is not special, and I can imagine there are many analogous places and stories for listeners from far afield, okay? And also the story that we're about to talk about kind of points to trends in global music, and hopefully the way we've framed it makes it relevant well beyond this storm in a teacup story that kicked off in Glasgow, okay? So please, we are about to talk about something that's quite narrow, but I suspect it's got relevance in the bigger scheme of things, okay?
Yeah.
The whole argument exploded mid-July on the back of an article by a writer called Alexander Ralston for a Glasgow newsletter called The Bell. It's not a magazine. I mean, it is a website, but it's more just a newsletter that people subscribe to. And they cover all kinds of things. They've actually done some pretty good work. The Union Street Fire was a big thing for them, and they've covered it pretty well.
Recent stuff about the far right in Glasgow as well.
The far right, recently, especially. Aye. It was an interview with somebody called Sorley Mackay. By the way, fucking brilliant name.
Sorley's a class first name.
Sorley Mackay.
Sorley Mackay.
Sounds like a character in 1970s Scottish drama. Anyway, from the Scottish band DOS, which is also a very Scottish word, by the way, it will not explain.
Although weirdly, mostly, I would associate that word with the East Coast and not so much the West Coast.
There you go. Cultural appropriation.
Aye.
I mean, I'm from Stirling, so I get to have a foot in both camps.
Yeah,
totally. So this article begins with a gig in 2022 when DOS was playing at a place called the Poetry Club for the promotions company DF Concerts. They were doing a support slot for a show that DF Concerts were putting on in this little venue, and they played a song called DF, Dirty Fuckers. And word got around. I remember hearing about it just a couple of days later. I mean, it's not that big a deal, really. It was just a bit cheeky and a bit like, oh, they did that. Oh, they've probably burnt their bridges, you know. But anyway, whatever. But why were DOS so raging at what is the biggest promotions company in the country, and arguably the kingmakers of Scottish indie, you know?
And also one of the biggest in the UK as well.
Overall, yeah. So this, fast forward to now, this article comes out 4 years after that gig happened, and it's kind of talking about what motivated that. And there was a furious reaction to the article. Again, it was like, why is everybody else so raging at King Tut's, which is the venue that DF owns? There was a lot of that in the comments under it. And in particular, their very outspoken CEO, Jeff Ellis. Now, Jeff's a big figure in Glasgow. Jeff's achieved a lot.
He's done well for himself.
Yeah. We're only talking about Jeff because he's an extremely capable and successful man. Mm-hmm. Right? The only reason he's in this conversation is that. And I think in that kind of high-profile position, you have to develop some sort of level of thick skin because people are going to comment. He's
been involved in the music scene for 40 years.
Exactly. Right? He started out as a promoter and he is now an extremely wealthy and successful man as a result of his achievements. So, you know, credit where it's due. So, being the contrarians that we are, Mark, that's what we are, by the way. That's what people tell me when I bump into them.
Sometimes I'll kick a hornet's nest. So.
A number of questions suggested themselves. Do DF Concerts and King Tut's genuinely care about the bands they host or the health of the wider scene? Mm-hmm. This article suggests, and many of the commenters loudly scream no. But are we demonising them unfairly? So we designed a little experiment, you and I, to get some actual numbers. Come back to that. As an alternative to DF Concerts, in this article, Sorley Mackay and many others posting underneath it were advocating cutting out the middlemen and promoting shows for yourself.
Oh, well, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That's weird.
We should have thought of that. No, but to be fair, that is something that a lot of people don't realise, right?
Yeah, you're right, totally.
So let's look at that too.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode, is because if you're a new band, right, you've got a certain image of what you want to achieve. Sending emails to folk and asking for gigs is the way you're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's just intuitive that you would do that, or like sending DMs or whatever, right? And I was thinking to myself when all this DF stuff came up, I've paid for DF a couple of times, and I'll expand on that as we go on. It was a long time ago, to be fair. And the thing that they offer, which we'll also touch upon, was one of the first things I ever experienced as a playing in bands when I was very, very young. So I was thinking, well, what would I like to impart to people who maybe have never thought of another way of doing it, right? Because it's not hard, it's just very daunting, and it's really difficult to know where to start sometimes.
Yeah, I think we should kind of frame this here. So what we're basically saying is a Stramash blew up, right? But what it's done is it's brought to people's attention, why are we even bothering with promoters? Why are we doing this? They're taking us for a ride. Now, that is not me speaking, that's just the sort of flavour that came out of this kind of like this mess. And so it raised this question, why are we dealing with these guys at all? Are they ripping us off? Are these venues ripping us off? Are we as bands and young promoters and enthusiasts just being fucked by this system? That's what we're going to try and look at, okay? If you want a dispassionate look at running a small gig in Glasgow, you know, the case studies that we're going to do are Glaswegian, but again, they're probably applicable more or less across not just the country, but across other scenes. If you agree that this might be an issue with relevance to the wider music scenes, please come with us on this wee journey. Some disclaimers and preamble. Being clear, as any listener, regular listener to this podcast knows, I am definitely not here to throw myself on a grenade for DF concerts, and certainly not for Live Nation, who are going to come up. Indeed, I mean, you mentioned having played for them. The last time I played for King Tut's, the venue that they own, I was told I wouldn't be welcome back. We'd been invited to support David Yow in the band Quee.
Wow, okay.
Personally. And we just simply refused to traipse around our friends and relatives selling tickets by hand to our families,
Well,
right?
That's kind of what they,
that's
I'm
what
sure
they
we'll come
do,
to this,
yeah.
we'll come to this, but yeah, that's kind of how it works, isn't it?
Plenty of people showed up for that gig. It was a great gig, as expected. We were gigging a lot. We were touring Europe. We were working hard, right? But prior to the show, when I went up to the office in King Tut's and I handed back that bundle of tickets still in the original elastic bands intact, that was not well received.
Yeah.
So
I've heard similar stories from friends of mine who've done the same thing, you know, similar thing. Anyway.
And you know, I did try and say, I was like, look, don't doubt how hard we've worked at this. This is going to go well, but I am not doing this. I'm not walking about selling these to my granny. Especially because I would have had to dig her up.
Well,
but
yeah.
So I've had plenty of pot shots at DF. That applies to my role as an independent promoter too, right? I've lost count of the number of bands that have missed out on what I would consider great support opportunities with my own promotions due to these DF concert exclusivity contracts that will get a mention. These contracts that prohibit you from playing, tends to be 4 weeks either side of your show.
When I started, it was 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks and expanded to 4, and that's effectively 2 months, right? So for a local band, trying to get better, trying to rehearse, trying to get into gigging, trying to get established and get in front of new faces, play with different groups, you know, appropriate some of their audience. When you combine the way that the company also heaps, they have this system where they put 4 bands a night for a month. They do this in January, they do it in the middle of summer as well. So it's effectively 2 months of the year plus 4 weeks either side. I mean, it's crazy. You're basically talking about 1/3 of a calendar year where the bands that are involved in those shows, which are of questionable benefit, can't go and do shows elsewhere for the myriad other promoters putting on tour and stuff. Now, if those shows work out well, great. But if they don't, which a lot of them are really a bit of a shrug, it's like, well, this band can't go and do something else. You know, I understand the logic. I'm not trying to strawman them here. The case they'll make is that if we want that band to have a good night and make loads of money selling their tickets and people turn up, we don't want them oversaturating the scene. And that may well be true, but I think as a promoter, your role is to monitor that. If a band isn't trying to get people along, one of your few jobs is to say, guys, you're not trying enough, and not book them again. If a band lets you down, you don't bring them back. That is your job. That is my job, is to monitor that.
You're absorbing the risk as a promoter, right?
Exactly.
That,
you can't legislate to try and prevent that. There are many, many bands, including bands that went on to be very successful, like Twin Atlantic, who were playing every week. And that's how they built their following. Jerry Cinnamon, that's how he built his following. If he'd been tied down to those contracts, he wouldn't be the act that he is now. And I appreciate that for every one of them, there's probably 100 the other way, but you just cannot apply broad strokes to these. It creates a lot of resentment, not least amongst the other promoters in the city.
I just want to be in the spirit of fairness as well. They're not the only promoter that does this.
They are
in
not.
This city.
No, very much so.
Some of them have slightly smaller terms, like 2 weeks, like I said earlier on, which is what it originally was when I first played the DF.
I can kind of live with that. I mean, again, I just wouldn't put that caveat out there at all as a promoter. But at least that's like a little bit more reasonable.
Well, personally, I wouldn't do it either when I'm promoting gigs. However, I kind of take some approach like that with the bands that I play in. I don't really want to be playing in Glasgow more than a couple of times a year. But
that's where I think it comes down to you as a promoter having to monitor the bands, because common sense does come into it. Now, even just saying that, I get they'll say, bands don't have common sense. I'm in bands. I know we don't have common sense, right? But that is your job, is to monitor the ones that do and don't. And I just don't think that is your place to forbid people to do that. When you're paying them a pittance as well. Totally. I mean, if you were giving that band £500, £1,000, well, okay, you've got a bit of leverage there. You're getting them fucking 30, 50, 60 quid. Fuck off, mate. You know.
Yeah. I agree, and I think, you know, it precludes yourself from being available for other potentially huge opportunities as well.
Yeah.
Like, you could play a really great show in King Tut, and then somebody for another promotions company would be there, and like be a band that's touring that are doing quite well, that are in your niche, and they might be like, can you play this gig?
Yeah, I mean,
like 2 weeks later, then that's possible, right?
The notion as well that you can say which are the more effective shows is kind of flawed anyway. You know, you can do a show at King Tut's and nobody gives a damn. You can do bigger supports than that, man. You can do supports at the Barrowlands where people just boo you off the stage, get out the road. But you can go and play to 20 people and blow somebody's mind and they're from the right place or the right band, whatever. Anyway, I also despise the industrialised bussing of Waynes and aunties from North Lanarkshire that the likes of DF and King Tut's engage in, you know, to fill the bar, fill the place up at the quietest points of the year with these gigs. I want
to talk about this as well, but continue.
I mean, DF will hold up their ticket split model, you know, where like you sell a ticket for, let's say, £12 and you keep 4 or 5 of that. They'll say that's encouraging proactive promotion and also generating income. However, in reality, most bands will not charge their closest friends and family the full value of that ticket. They will charge them the portion, at best, that they have to give back to DF for that ticket. So let's say they have to hand £8 back. They'll say, oh, just give me 8, granny. You know what I mean? You don't.
I've been there, done that.
Exactly. You know? That's how. That is. DF knows that, right? They can wave their hands and say, well, that's not really our problem, but it's a de facto reality. So claiming that because a band sold 100 tickets and they got to keep £4 from a ticket, we've done that. That's not how it worked. We also know, as band members, that bands are idiots, right? Bands are full of idiots.
We're all fucking idiots.
Especially drummers. Especially drummers. So you have the issue of lost or forgotten or unused tickets that you then have to account for.
Here's 50 tickets, we'll go split them up between 4 of these, and then some go missing.
Somebody loses 10, so you're then paying £80 for 10 tickets that are actually just sitting in a drawer. That kind of level of like...
Been there as well.
Yeah, like, exactly. So, you know, I do want to say as well, we'll talk about it a bit more. It's interesting that I noticed that Musicians Union have changed their guidelines on these kinds of gigs. They used to be very against them, and they've now massively softened their stance on them. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Come back to that. They call it, I think it's collaborative promotions or something like that. But maybe most of all these days, when it comes to DF concerts, I despise Transmit Festival to the greatest degree. I'm trying to be polite.
Just Transmit or also Connect?
No, Transmit.
And
Transmit much more.
Yeah.
Now, festivals are fun, and festivals featuring big mainstream acts with broad appeal are not just inevitable, but I think they are important culturally, right? People do deserve fun. These acts are there for a reason, and I don't.
People deserve fun.
People do deserve. It's not a sentence you ever thought would come out of my mouth, right? But I don't even begrudge big companies making their wad from it, right? Fuck it, like who cares? Operations that big, when you're dealing with some of these huge acts, they need big companies. They need big infrastructure.
Yeah,
they need experience,
absolutely,
and the professionalism. So, for example, Tea in the Park, which DF concerts ran for years and years and years, out in the wilds, expensive, but certainly maybe prior to the latter days when the quality, I think, of the booking slipped, but it was an excellent festival. I mean, you go back to some of the legendary, like 96, with like Rage and bands like that. Transmit, on the other hand, it's an inner city festival, right? It massively exploits the infrastructure, which we as taxpayers pay for, and the goodwill of a busy metropolitan area to the benefit of one set of people, and that's the companies behind Transmit, because the rest of the public often stay away from the city because it's a circus. Right? They stay away from that. They stay away from the closed roads and the mobbed, trains and all that kind of thing. The council cleans up all the spew and the trash. The NHS handles all the heat stroke and the alcohol poisoning, and meanwhile, the sheer cost of attending that festival, the fact that people set it aside in their diaries, wreaks havoc on the rest of the local promotion scene for weeks, because people are like, oh, there's a brilliant gig on Tuesday, but I'm going to Transmit on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, so I'll just give it a miss. And again, you've got that effect before and after where it just decimates the attendances at certain shows. And by the way, As a footnote here, and as somebody that's invited to these meetings, I also love being told by DF how the industry's in rude health. Ticket sales are higher than ever, because what they really mean is that take that sold out 2 nights at Hampden. This is when like small independent venues are closing at extinction level numbers.
Yeah, well, 2 things I want to pick up on. Let me pick up on the last thing you said there first. The tickets are selling at higher rates than ever before. They cost also more than they have ever, because like Ticketmaster, Live Nation's whole thing is about creating experiences, and that's people are paying for an experience when they go see Take That. But it's ruining. Well,
you're talking about big shows. This is very much
shows,
for big
definitely
shows.
For big shows. Like for shows that the bands that we go see, the bands that we like, the bands that most of the people listen to this podcast like. It's a very different landscape. I want to come back to the tickets split thing you're talking about as well, just for a wee moment. You didn't do it, but like I was definitely guilty of like trying to get all my fucking aunties and uncles and cousins and granny and all that to come to gigs, right? And
don't get me wrong, by the way, we did it for a while with one of my bands. We got 100 tickets for one show. We sold 100 tickets for one show. We didn't even get food for that gig, by the way.
Yeah, well, I mean it's part of this conversation, really, isn't it? The deeper part of this conversation. But see when you're starting out as a band and you're able to shift that amount of tickets, you're like, oh, that's cracking. You start to think, can we do this every single time? Well, no, you can't. It starts to kind of. It's cruel, I think, in a lot of ways. It's like, oh shit, we'll do another gig in King Tut, it's like next year, and we'll ask them, you'll be lucky if half those folk come, because folk are going to come out and be like, I know them, that's great, and you're probably not going to be that good, to be fair. You're just starting out. I mean, you need to get better, but they're not going to come see you again, whether they think you're great or not, right?
Yeah.
So that's not your audience. And one of the things that annoys me about
it's not audience development if you're simply getting people to bring their workmates and fans.
Absolutely.
And families.
But if you think that that's the only way you can do it, then 2 things are going to happen, right? The first thing is either going to be you do an gig and it doesn't happen, and you're like, oh, well, there's no point in doing this because no one's coming to see us, which is not really the way to look at it. Or you kind of start looking around at other folk, other friends and all that who are doing other kinds of gigs, and you're starting to think, well, hang on a second, I'm playing in front of folk who don't know me at all.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you want to happen. You want that to happen, right? I think that showcasey kind of nights can be very much guilty of like creating false expectations and false promises specifically for younger acts. I think you and I could be in a band and take that gig and know exactly what we're going to get out of doing that, right? I don't think that's the case for a lot of younger folks, which is what led me to want to do this episode in the first place, is because, well, economically, it actually also kind of seems a bit alluring economically as well. Like if you're getting getting £4 every ticket, right, then that's actually a decent amount of money. If you can sell 50 tickets for £4, but that's very rarely going to be the case.
Yeah.
You know?
So I want to kind of keep this in the real world for people that are listening. What is behind the reaction to the Bell article? Because the reaction was like hostile. I mean, every one of those posts had hundreds of comments underneath it, right?
Mine still get comments, I don't understand.
Yours is hot. Let's not say what your username is, just in case we get something in the post that explodes. Back to the bubbling anger, though, that provoked the article in the Bell. What is the central issue here? Is it purely about the band fees? I would suggest not. Right, that is the thrust of the piece, but is that the thrust of the backlash or the support for the piece? I don't think so. A lot of criticism in it and under it revolves around numbers, but I don't think that's really what's fueling it. So you and I, again, we decided to test a hunch, and we'll come back to that test soon, but I think there's more at play, and there exists a kind of smouldering, spreading resentment of King Tut's and DF Concerts. That is maybe largely due to DF Concerts themselves, and in turn Live Nation, the company that bought into DF 2008, and who I would say is like the dark shadow casting itself across the land of music, you know? So, sorry, we've thrown a lot of names about here, so let's very quickly sort of clarify, what are these entities and what are we actually talking about? There's a lot of conflation in the online melee. People talking about King Tut's, people talking about DF, people talking about Live Nation like they're the same thing. They're not. They're connected. They're not. And it doesn't help us have a sensible discussion, so let's disambiguate. King Tut's Wawa Hut, full name, is the venue on St Vincent Street in Glasgow, set up in 1990. DF Concerts owns King Tut's. It might be worth noting, actually, that their offices are above it. DF Concerts itself began in Dundee in 1982. A fella called Stuart Klumpus. He was working at Dundee University, setting up events, I think, for the student union, that kind of thing. Set it up as Dance Factory, you'll notice the DF, Dance Factory, booking club nights at a place called Fat Sam's. I think Fat Sam's is still there.
I think it's still there.
I think it's a bit of a shadow of its former self. That expanded into bigger events over time, and you fast forward, Klumpus eventually sold all his shares to an Irish promotions group. They, in turn, sort of merged upwards in this kind of like corporate John Carpenter-esque body horror fashion and sold those shares to a new consortium that also involved them but was controlled by Live Nation in 2008. So King Tut's, the venue, is owned by DF, which is now majority controlled by Live Nation Entertainment Incorporated.
78%.
That is the world's biggest and I would suggest most disreputable music promotions group outside the Fire Festival. And also, the reason it's Live Nation Entertainment Inc. is because it absorbed or it merged with Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
About a year or so after that.
I was just going to say
Boo.
that. Yeah, boo. Live Nation UK is the UK arm, separate legal entity from Live Nation
Entertainment
Inc. Yeah. But it is essentially the same company.
So Clumpus is now long gone, and the current CEO of DF, Jeff Ellis, is a character. He's previously commented. I mean, he's a well-known figure in Scotland. There's records I'm talking about. Let's say DF's clout in the Scottish market. So in 2002, there's a quote: "Robbie Williams doesn't need to use a Scottish-based promoter. It can all be done from one of the English promoters, but we'll do a far better job because we understand the market." Talking about DF concerts, power in Scotland. Jeff was claiming at the time that Robbie's gig at the Barras was in danger of being half empty. I think it only sold half the tickets until DF stepped in and used their knowledge of the Scottish market to shift the other half of the tickets. Now, putting that to one side, personally, do I find that a particularly believable story? I'm not sure. Was Robbie Williams, even at his lowest ebb, only shifting 1,000 tickets? It sounds more like somebody made a huge arse of the gig until DF stepped in and actually fixed it. But Jeff, for example, also claimed that DF masterminded a sold-out show by the Eagles in 2002 when their English dates were struggling. Again, I'm a little sceptical because it's the fucking Eagles, guys.
Eagles, yeah.
But anyway, the point he's making is that they can clean up this shit because they're professional. They know what they're fucking doing, and they absolutely are. It's a big organisation full of qualified, well-organised people. Don't get me wrong, they probably make mistakes from time to time. Everybody does. But overwhelmingly, their reputation is one of professionalism and being able to execute big events properly.
Well, yeah, they're the biggest in the country for a reason, right? Because they have the infrastructure, they have the resources that are able to make these things go like clockwork.
Yeah, and Jeff has commented publicly since the article via multiple Instagram posts furiously. I know for a fact that ex-members of the DF marketing department are delighted to not be working there at the moment. The very fact, I think, that the Bell article got so much traction was largely due to Jeff having that hissy fit in the comments thread.
I mean, as a marketing professional, I would definitely not advise a CEO to go nuclear in the comments.
Yeah, he probably knows that now. You know, on that note...
He probably knew it before that as well. He's been doing this for so long. There's probably some degree of calculation
Jeff is
there.
Clearly hot-headed, as my own experiences have shown. But he's also someone that likes to keep track of criticism. So, just in case, I would like to go on the record and say, Jeff...
Hi, Jeff.
You're rich. Get yourself a wee flight to the Seychelles for a weekend and console yourself with some massive margaritas on the beach. Life is short, for fuck's sake. Get off the internet.
And if you want to do like a Scrooge McDuck thing into a pool full of cash, you can also probably do that.
Yeah. But DF Concerts in Scotland, so as you said, DF Concerts are the biggest promoter in the country and a hugely influential company. You know, if you're a Scottish musician and want to get really big, not just big, but really big, you generally have to work with them.
Well, at least we had this discussion before, right? That when we're chatting about this, it's like
the contrary examples are few and far between, really.
Very much so.
DF does arenas, it does stadia, it does greenfield events mostly. You may have heard of the Pope. You ever heard of the Pope?
Oh, him? Aye.
Totally banging. Well, totally DF Concerts put him on in Bellahouston Park in 2010. And I would fucking love to see his rider.
Big GP? Oh, no, not JP. Fucking, was it, what's his face?
It was the one that gave up poping.
Aye. Benedict.
But yeah, so DF don't really have that much competition on this level domestically. You know, there are some exceptions. So I would say that right now, trad music is peaking. And I don't think DF really understands trad music yet, or at least whether they can make it work for them financially. But the thing is, they probably will if they think that the value of that market can sustain itself. local rivals here. Maybe regular music seem to be more of an avenue for trad.
They also run the bandstand as well, regular music.
Run the bandstand from time to time. They don't run it all year. They just take out these big chunks of it. Regular music also do stuff at Edinburgh Castle. They're a company with a very good reputation overall, as far as I'm aware. Company LLC do some big stuff. They do Stirling Castle on occasion, and they've done stuff further north where I don't think DF have ventured quite as much. PCL in Glasgow working some really big shows at the Hydro, Bellahouston Park, Hampden Park collaboratively. 432 likewise working the odd large gig, not quite at that scale. But again, there's no consistent rival to DF concerts for the really big events domestically. But it makes up the bulk of their business model, and I think the Live Nation ownership certainly has only strengthened their access to the very biggest acts and likely biased them even further towards that sector of the market as an entity, you know. So out with a King Tut's, the venue, DF aren't really bothering too much with shifting 150 tickets at small spaces here or there, unless it's maybe part of, you know, sometimes like you want to book this big act, so the agent insists that you take on X, Y and Z for a smaller act. You're doing it as a favour, or unless you have really high long-term hopes for some promising new talent, right? The equivalents of DF down south, for example, like SGM, they don't do smaller stuff. So DF Concert seems to be an exception by even maintaining a place like King Tut's. Financially, it's a small part of their business and negligible even, you could say. So why do they keep Tuts, you know?
I mean, I rather suspect that Jeff started his journey in DF as a promoter, and King Tut is eventually managing it, you know. I suspect a part of it is perhaps just nostalgia, you know, like a kind of a thing.
That's really interesting, yeah. So, I mean, in terms of utility to DF concerts, the conventional wisdom is that the DF concerts largely use King Tut's to try and sort of scout for new talent and potentially breakout acts that can be spun into bigger profits later.
That was probably true at some point in the past.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think even now DF reps can perhaps spot promising bands that are, you know, just getting on the ladder, and thus maybe they hope that it helps them avoid missing potential future revenue. For example, I would imagine, and it's just a guess, but DF sees someone like Jerry Cinnamon as a huge missed financial opportunity in the early days, because Jerry was booking big, sold-out shows himself. He's phoning Dublin Arena himself. Hi, I'm Jerry Cinnamon. I want to book the Dublin Arena, and people are hanging up on him. You know what I mean? So I think DF are seeing a guy like that and saying, oh, we should have had that. That should be on our roster. But that said, even if a band does start to make waves off its own energies, DF can pretty quickly seduce them. I mean, that's what happened with Churches, who are probably one of the biggest success story from the kind of indie pop sort of scene in Scotland of recent years. DF wined and dined them. They didn't get the band started. The band was already on a fast track. They were already on the road to stardom. There was a bit of a kind of bidding war thing happening. What DF did was approach them and ensure professional, reliable event delivery for a group that required a lot of logistics and production. And that's really, really important. I mean, that's extremely valuable if you're going to be doing shows the size of Churches shows. You need to have faith that that's going to come together properly, right? So the feeder venue angle, because, I mean, Feeder the band played at Tuts as well, right? But the feeder venue angle doesn't entirely add up for me these days. As I say, if need be, they can approach any talent, really, and they have a lot to offer. As you say, Mark, I think my gut instinct is that there's a large degree of sentimentality, maybe couched in a sort of public relations benefits of having this public facing sort of like building that puts stuff on. You know, for DF concerts, King Tut's is their contact point with your everyday folk. And now for Live Nation as well, by extension, that is their like feet on the ground. Yeah, and it also, just to finish that point, it might be why Jeff takes some of the criticism so personally.
Possibly, you know, if you look at Live Nation's portfolio of venues they have in the UK, they own 16 venues in the UK or have a share of 16 venues in the UK. Many of them are O2 Academy venues or O2 venues, because they have a 51% share in the Academy group. Yeah. But even when you look at their own official metrics or statistics or whatever for the venues they own, King Tut's is not part of that, right? It's all these bigger venues, the Victoria Warehouse in Manchester, O2 Academies, you know, all that kind of stuff. So It's curious to me that, this is it looks as though it is the only venue of this size that they have in the UK.
Yeah, unless there's others that are likewise not on.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'm saying that. I do say that, and you're totally right. I mean, totally right to say that. There could be others, you know. But that would also necessarily dictate that there are promotions companies that have smaller venues in England or Wales, which we don't.
They did buy up, or they did buy into a number of similar companies, and a lot of the people involved in those companies took kind of key roles in Live Nation as a result, and may have kept these places on for the same reasons.
But on the Live Nation books 16, these smaller venues are certainly not part of it. But maybe that's part of the business model, right? It's like your Ticketmaster called the flywheel model, right? Is they can deliver everything to the artist and consumer, right?
Monopolies and mergers, anyone. But I mean, given the negative press though, or at least the negative press more recently, I do sometimes wonder if Tuts is on the brink of becoming a bit more of a liability image-wise. Presumably the owners still see it as beneficial on the balance, given the historical reputation.
Well, if you look at the actual accounts that DF put in last year at Company's House, Live Nation still seem to be quite happy with the fact that King Tut's exists. Whether or not King Tut's is making money or not, nobody knows. It's hard to say. But it seems to be that they're okay with it.
Yeah, it would be guesswork in this market, but it certainly won't be making as much as it probably was prior. But, you know, if DF see Tuts as a key part of their brand and a way to maintain ties to the lower echelons of the Scottish scene, is it not maybe worth investing a bit of their income, like their wider income, in improving the terms and thus potentially the image of Tuts, to really ingrain it within popular sentiments again? As you commented last week, Mark, you know, like, why not try and funnel some of these large profits from the parent companies into that? But it did get me thinking, you know, and again, this is guesswork, but perhaps if DF start sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, their corporate accountant owners may intervene. And when it comes down to it, to avoid any interventions, perhaps DF have to keep Tuts looking solvent on its own terms. So when, like in the article, bands are complaining about what they got paid and that, and they're like, but this is such a big company, why are we getting paid like shit? Yes, but the books of the big company are perhaps totally irrelevant in this case, because that big company may well start putting pressure on this venue if it feels like a drain on their overall finances, because they're a fucking corporation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they're not sentimental about these things. Their accountants certainly aren't.
Yeah.
So DF probably have to give this sense that Tuts is autonomous and self-sustaining.
Well, I was going to say, I think,
don't want to jeopardise that. You know?
I think that probably, to me, that kind of, obviously this is speculation, but I think because of what you just said there, I think that's maybe an argument for why King Tut's is able to, let's say, financially wash its face on a regular basis. Because I don't think the corporate overlords would really be particularly happy, just my own opinion on this. I don't think they'd be happy if they had a venue in their books that was losing money hand over fist every single year. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or was a PR liability as well.
Yeah.
They are probably somewhat restricted in what they can pay bands at Tuts, even though it's a high profile venue, because the industry is a fucking riot, and Tuts is not a license to print money the way it probably used to be.
Because if Tuts is squared away, then if they need to take the money out of the money they're making, and as we know, as we're about to talk about, the actual industry in Glasgow for like a small venue is, you know, it's hard to make ends meet.
Yeah,
and it kind of makes sense, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, we're building up this wee study that we ran, so we'll get back to that. But what is the appeal of Tuts, I guess, to them and to us? I mean,
Oasis. Oasis.
Oasis. Who's that? Never heard them mention them. I mean, to them, we've kind of established that maybe it's their front facing kind of talent scouting thing, whatever. There's a lot of guesswork there. But to us, to the public, to the punter, to the bands, first off, to give it its due, King Tut's is a good venue for that size, arguably a very good venue, especially given that bands can easily bring in their own production quite easily, and that's a really big thing these days. And not many other venues, certainly in that bracket of capacity, which I think is 300, have that facility so readily available, have a sound system of that tier, you know what I mean? So I have to say that, just to acknowledge this, because some people might be unaware, yes, King Tut's actually did have a serious sound limiter issue for a while. Basically, it was like a legal battle with somebody that had moved near to the venue, and the sound was heavily limited. I was at gigs during that period. They were fucking horrendous. I actually heard first-hand accounts of a Frightened Rabbit gig that happened in there, where the dB limit was something ridiculous, let's say like 94, mid-90s, right? And then when the band went on stage, the crowd noise was 101 dB. So
can't account for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so are we going to get shut down because people are clapping too loud? You know, that kind of level. That is gone now, though, right? The sound in the venue is very good and can be very loud it's back to probably where it used to be in terms of quality.
I always felt it was a good sounding venue. Always, I hadn't been in about a decade, but
it wasn't during that period. But again, that was like out with our control. But that doesn't explain the kind of outsized cultural profile the venue enjoys. So what does,
Oasis.
Is that? I think the reasons behind Tut's allure, as well as perhaps the growing hostility towards it, are actually quite relatable. So let's personalise it. I'm extremely cool.
wait a minute.
Everybody says it, right? Extremely cool, right? But even I, as hip as I am, did not get into music, did not pick up a guitar, to jump around in front of 20 people in a German squat on a Tuesday, right? Even I did not do that, right? Nor was I switched on to music by hearing like some obscure Jacopsy 7-inch grindcore classic split record, do you know what I mean? I was 14. I wanted to be Kurt Cobain. I loved Definitely Maybe. I loved R.E.M. I liked Tool. Like the vast majority of people in the DIY and underground scene, I got into music through much more mainstream and common influences, but then gravitated towards DIY and the way of life, and I grew to embrace it. Largely, by the way, due to forces that were out of my control, such as total industry indifference, lack of opportunity, and lack of talent, right? But I've had 26 years of doing that. I'm hugely familiar with the DIY and underground scene in the UK and beyond, and I remain a massive believer in bootstrapped approaches to music, right? So you want a gig in Tullabuddy, better learn how to plug in a PA. You want to play a show in Geneva, you better start trading favours with bands and collecting phone numbers, right? And you also better join the AA and learn how to ask for directions to a garage in like 10 languages, right? But being clear, doing that type of music does represent a decision in terms of your music's ability to be turned into an occupation. So that, there's the Albini quote.
Aye, totally.
You have no entitlement to be a professional musician. The DIY scene is hugely rewarding creatively and personally, but it's not at all lucrative. Okay, at most you're looking for self-sustaining here, right? Most music is not lucrative, by the way, and that is definitely often forgotten, and that is again part of what feeds into people's frustrations. But the DIY scene doesn't even pretend to be lucrative.
I think there's a reason why a lot of bands that I like, but probably we like, that there's a reason why many of the people in it have multiple bands.
Aye, absolutely.
It's because they can't, that's the only way to make it go.
There's also a reason why so many people end up, I speak from personal experience here, we lost probably our most talented musician to that very reality. Somebody who wanted to be a professional musician but could not afford to stay in that world, agreeing to tours, agreeing to gigs, to do DIY shows for £50, £100, whatever, when they could be earning a full-time wage.
Yeah.
We'll talk about those wages in a wee bit. Squat gigs do not pay mortgages as much as I love them. Sorry, guys. So perversely, though, I guess, the same hardships and struggles that make the DIY scene kind of a fool's errand in a lot of ways also make it so hip, also make it so personal. It feels like community. It feels vital. It feels extra meaningful. But whilst DIY is my cross to bear, what got me in to being in a band, what got me into music, was to a large extent aspiration. Nirvana, Oasis, Green Day, back in those like 13, 14 years old kind of days. And aspiration is the fuel of DF Concerts machine.
Well,
right?
That's what I kind of think.
And therein lies a lot of the resentment that I'm seeing, because it's an aspiration industry. So King Tut's opened in 1990. It became a cornerstone of the UK scene at a time when that scene was really vibrant. You may have heard some rumours, Mark, of Oasis being signed by Creation on the back of a show there. The venue will rarely mention it, but believe me, it's true. The venue also hosted basically everybody for the 90s scene. Radiohead, Muse, Blur. That continued in the 2000s to a large extent, especially with bands like Biffy Clyro and Frightened Rabbit breaking through.
Dip a toe in the ocean, oh how it hardens and it numbs. The rest of me is a version of mine, built to collapse and crumb. And if I hadn't come now to the coast...
The room was great, the location in the city worked, the sound system was excellent at the time, as I remember. It just had loads of buzz. And likewise, DF Concerts itself was actually a company to court, so they ran Tea in the Park from 1994. and they brought in a thing called the tea break stage, and that was genius. The tea break stage, right? It served as an outlet for new talent and was honestly one of the most hotly anticipated aspects of the musical calendar for all bands.
Many of our peers played that stage.
Yeah, and the company, you know, King Tut's, for better or worse, would hold heats, effectively battles of the bands, putting people against each other.
I mean, boo that.
Yeah, it should be said that whilst a lot of bands took part, that too became a source of criticism. The heats were kind of fickle. They left a lot of bands with a sense of injustice. The company, meanwhile, sort of reserved the right to just add bands into slots, which created a wee bit of acrimony between different groups in the scene. But overall, the concept made DF Concerts and Tea in the Park and King Tut's really relevant to that constant churn of new bands, and it really kept them in touch with the local scene and vice versa. Then something changed. Live Nation bought into DF Concerts in 2008 amidst rumours of financial troubles, you know, and let's be clear, DF Concerts and many other places across the UK, Live Nation was trying to buy local credibility at the same time. But I think the effect seems to have gone the other way, because what's happened is rather than Live Nation becoming more relatable, a lot of the venues have become the sort of understandable corporate face of music. It's been quite a toxic association. So soon after, King Tut's went from being a place that you were at many times a month, at least for people from our sort of area of the music industry, right? It went from being a place you were at a few times a month to being a place that you sort of struggled to remember the inside of it, because you're like, well, I can't even remember the last time I was up there for a show.
I said earlier on, I don't think I've been into a gig in there in about a decade, genuinely. I think the last time I was in King Tut's was a gig that I played. I
was at Cavalera Conspiracy, which was a real occasion because it was so weird that it was there.
Yeah.
You know?
But I've seen many of my favourite bands play that venue. Just
absolutely.
a long time ago, right? Because they're bigger now, but like it was some of my favourite gigs have happened in that venue.
At one stage, I had seen, now I think I've got this right, Entombed, Icarus Line, McCluskey and Reuben inside a few weeks in that venue, and suddenly none of those acts would touch the place. It was just totally not on the radar for that kind of band. It was, as I said, the battle over sound pollution and noise limiters didn't help, but it's not even just the gigs, is it? It's like the status of King Tut's in the community can be measured in the way that it's not really seen as a hangout place anymore, as a pub. I mean, it was that kind of thing where you say, like, you know, where'll I get you? Oh, I'll meet you at Tut's. I mean, genuinely, if someone said to you now, oh, would you want to meet up for a beer? Or you said Tut's, you'd be like, what?
Yeah.
What? Why? It'd be like meeting in the O2 Academy before the doors open. You know, it's like a weird thing where it's become disconnected from that. And I mean, as I understand it, I was only young at the time, but Tut's was like a place that people went for a booze. You know, it was like it was a boozer as well as a music venue, and it was also a place you saw loads of, you know, the great and the good from the Glasgow indie scene at the time. And I don't know when the last time was that I went to Tut's for a drink.
Aye, I mean, same. Like I remember when I was growing up. Some of the first gigs I ever went to were in King Tut's, and it was a pretty cool place just to go and hang out as well.
Yeah.
And I now think it's the increasing corporatisation of it. I think.
Yeah, I think it's a measure of perception and how much a part of the community it feels. And
because if you think about it this way, right? So I first started going to King Tut's. I think the first band I saw in there was Feeling for a Friend in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
King Tut's, or DF rather, Live Nation took a stake in them in 2008.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much the bar has changed in terms of like the numbers that go in it to drink since then, but it certainly has a different feel when you go in it, and it has had for quite some time.
It's an incremental process. I don't think any community got together and went, hey, by the way, have you seen their corporate ownership now? Let's stop going there for a beer.
But when something starts feeling like it's not part of the community, you start to feel less connected to it.
It is, aye. You know, it's like stuff like the jukebox stop feeling like part of your life and all that. Just daft wee things like that, you know. And I think they tried hard to counterbalance that where like their steps tell you bands that have played there and stuff like that. But, you know, it's like, who are you kidding?
I know.
You know, despite the decline of the venue, despite that reputational damage, the lore just sort of lived on. That whole thing about Oasis, that whole thing about this is your big break, Oasis, your big break. In fact, maybe due to the decline of the actual, I would suggest, the quality and diversity of the output, the marketing leaned more and more and more into that. It became more of an eye roll that they were leaning into that for relevance. And it worked. I mean, especially outside of Glasgow, it worked, you know, in the kind of the towns around about, and especially in the kind of recollections of your new dads who saw the Stranglers and the Manics there in 1991, and still that's their touchstone for music in Glasgow. It's, King Tut's, aye, that's the one you should play, son, you know, here's my guitar, go and start a band. And DF hardly hides that tactic of selling a dream to all these starry-eyed kids for North Lanarkshire and Renfrewshire and stuff like that. They're barely out of school and they just want to strut about on the same stage as Liam Gallagher and prove to their parents that being in a band is a serious thing, you know. And Tut sells that dream harder than any other venue in the Glasgow discussion. I mean, there are other venues that do a bit of it, but that is their whole kind of modus operandi, right? They've been slapping Oasis on leaflets. Oasis on leaflets. They've been slapping it on websites. They've been slapping it on buildings since the mid-90s. And I mean, how fucking old is that Steve Lamacq quote that they keep using? I mean, that quote, Steve Lamacq must have said that over a brown wooden tranny during the war with a family huddled round it. You know what I mean? And the Bell article features some telling lines to that effect. You know, there was a line, the boy for DOS said, DF kept emailing us and being like, we're going to give you this massive opportunity that's going to break DOS. And they were really bigging it up. So that line tells you what it's like when DF reaches out to you. Yeah. We are dangling that carrot. You could be the next big thing. And every generation of bands in this city will be able to identify the one or two anointed groups that DF took a shine to in their era, who seemed to benefit from every support and every festival slot going. I mean, for some it was like Father, Son and Vukovi. That was one generation. And nothing against them. If you get the opportunity, take it, right? More recently, I think Dead Ponies seem to be a band that have been selected for the push. You know, DF also seem to kind of specialise in snaring sort of solo performers who have mainstream potential. There tends to be a slickness and maybe even a sense of expectation around these artists. I mean, I've got this massive database that I use for booking 1,000+ bands in it, and I actually have a column for DF-ish, right? Because it kind of denotes bands and artists who seem, I would suggest, conspicuously overproduced. Like there's a bit of a heavy managerial hand in there, and also aspirational to the point of actually just being quite unapproachable. Like even when you offer them something pretty good, they just sort of dismiss it. It's not come through those channels that they're used to. I mean, DF knows the industry, and they do have something of an eye for bands with commercial potential, albeit plenty of their chosen ones have flopped, no matter how hard they rammed them down their throats. But most bands come to find over time that they are not going to be the ones. You know, after years of playing Tuts to dwindling sales to your aunties, as you said, it is natural for bands to get disillusioned and even resentful. They didn't get the Transmit slot that was always kind of dangled in front of them. They got offered yet another lousy support slot. They got that WADA ticket slapped in their palm yet again. And maybe that was fine when they were 18, maybe even when they were 28. Now they're 38. It's getting kind of fucking tragic. Do you know what I mean? And gradually, understandably, we all start to think, fuck this. Why am I busting my ass to bring drinkers into this otherwise empty pub for a pittance? Yeah. And it does beg the question, why are you?
Well, yeah, so just to put a bit of context on this, I think it's been a long time since you played King Tut's. I was approached to play King Tut's in November 2024. Their terms may have changed since then. Given some recent stuff that we've read online, it seems as though their terms haven't changed particularly much, but I was actually surprised.
So I was like, do you remember what you were offered?
Yeah, so I was asked, I'm looking at my phone right now, by the way, just in case anybody thinks that I'm staring down, but I think we've spoken briefly before about how King Tut's have got this thing called Summer Nights and New Year's Revolution, right? These are like the two main sort of showcase things they do every year. Yeah. It's like a month of gigs. They've also got a monthly thing apparently called Lava Lamp. Have you ever heard of Lava Lamp?
I haven't.
I hadn't heard of it either. The one that we were offered to play was number 15, so this was November 24, like I said. And it's a usual bump, you know, like a special event for artists to be part of, like this legendary venue sort of thing.
Turbocharge your career.
Yeah, pretty much, you know. So the show, so here's a direct quote. The show will be part of Lavalamp 15 and the deal will be £30 guarantee versus tickets sold. The face value of the tickets will be £11.
Versus?
Yeah. So
versus tickets sold.
Yeah. So basically it says, we're going paperless and Tuts. We'll give you a ticket link web. You'll keep £4 for every ticket. So for example, if you were to sell 30 tickets, you would get £120, 50 tickets sold will give you £200, etc. If the value of the tickets sold is less than £30, you will get £30.
If your profit share of the tickets is less than £30,
You get £30, yeah. Please be aware that the show's running order will be determined by advanced ticket sales.
Oh, I remember that. Aye.
Now,
getting bumped up and down bills.
Pretty much.
When you get headline bands that are on guarantees and riders and they're eating their dinner, yet they're on before you.
Yeah, exactly. Which is insane. And I responded simply by saying, yeah, our standard fee is £70 and got crickets at the back of that. And I think, that's it's quite bad practice, I think, because I don't think I would now be in a situation, as you just said, like I'm past 38 now. I don't think I'd be in a situation where I want to ask all my pals and my granny and stuff like that to buy a ticket and hand them a physical ticket or send them a link. You know what I mean? So they would do that, which means that if ever all my pals came to a King Tut's gig and they all bought tickets in the door, and I'm pretty confident I could get about 30 folk down, right?
Yeah.
I would earn no money.
That's such a sad claim. But sorry, carry on.
I know I said it. They came out of my mouth and I was like, yeah, not great there, Marky boy. But we'd be on first, even though we would have sold 30 tickets and £7 per ticket.
I don't want to just absolutely put the boot in here, but I do remember the time that we sold 100 tickets not getting food. And a band that was another Scottish band who, for whatever reason, had a guarantee and we didn't get in their dinner, even though an absolute fraction of the people who turned up to see them. And just the kind of weird early sense of injustice of like, I don't know if I should mention this, but that seems a bit wide, and how much would that have cost? And this is not just a criticism of King Tut's, that applies all over the shop in the scene. And that kind of stuff to me is just a failure of like PR. If nothing else, it's like, by the way, how could you don't insult some of your best customers? Like, here's a band that's just shifted 100 tickets for you. Give them some food, make them feel welcome.
I don't know, did you get a rider? Because they give you beers and stuff.
Yeah, there's beers in the fridge upstairs, which to be fair, a lot of places don't do.
Yeah, but it's like it's tiered as well. So like the top act get like the most amount of the booze.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. I remember that gig we got banned from. I remember David Yow being really quite surly and unpersonable until he got half his bottle of Jack Daniels down him, and after that he was brand new.
A lovely guy.
Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, one of the two, maybe both.
It's quite ironic actually. As of recording, it's been just about 10 years and 2 days since I played King Tut's. The photographs of that gig came up in my Google Photos earlier on today.
Well, we're criticising.
I wouldn't play it again, incidentally.
Yeah, I can tell. I don't know if we get a chance after this. We might be on a blacklist. Let's get to that in a second. Yeah. So, we're criticising Tuts. We're criticising the scene in general, actually. But we should criticise the article, I think, in the interests of balance here.
Yes.
Mark, you're gonna hate me for this, right? But I'm going to show how the sausage is made and break cover here. We actually made a mistake in the recording of this show.
Don't do this.
And we've had to fix it. We've had to go back and redo a bit of it now because we just realised that we'd got one of the details wrong.
So what's happened is that actually a bit of subterfuge has just been involved there, because when I said just
first of all,
10 years and 2 days to the day, was not as correct as of the previous recording time. It's no longer correct. It's now like a week.
We're now frauds as well.
10 days in a week.
The point is, right, there was a factual inaccuracy and we felt you can't go publishing things, putting them out there if you've not actually tried to at least get your facts straight. I don't think the Bell did anywhere near enough of that. Neither the writer nor their editorial staff checking up some of these details. And so we need to make a couple of observations. We're going through the venue terms. We're about to go through venue terms. A fine-tooth comb. It's incumbent upon us, I think, to note that there's gross inaccuracies in there. And I think, especially given the choppy waters they must have known they were about to wade into, it would have really behoved them to just take a little bit extra time to just check that certain claims were accurate. you've just mentioned, not being invited back. The article, or the latter part of the article, which is behind a paywall, by the way, for a lot of people, describes a blacklist, right? Which, and I'll read this a little bit out. Acts that fall foul of DF or other promotion companies like 432, PCL and Regular Music are effectively struck off from the mainstream scene. And then if one promotion company says these guys are shit, they're not to be booked, people will catch on and rumours spread. That's just how it works. Now, I'm here reporting for the coalface, right?
From the mainstream scene.
Fucking bollocks, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's really weird because the notion of a blacklist is actually a kind of like urban myth that's been kicking about in promotions in Glasgow for fucking ages. Like this exact phrase has come up multiple times before. I'm just going to say, even from those 4 companies that are named in that quote, at least 2 of those companies cannot stand the sight of each other. Mm-hmm. And there is no way that any bands that one was blacklisting would even remotely be communicated to the other, let alone cancelled because of that. That is just absurd. I've got bands that I won't book, but there are some people who say, for example, let's say somebody does something totally out of order, right? Steals money, assaults someone, something even worse, right? Yes, word will get around. You will communicate. You will contact people. If bands are repeatedly doing things, you'll tell your friends. But there is no secret, chat group. No
shadowy cabal here.
Yeah, no like password protected, like 2-tier encryption promoters gang hut that is like there for us to that just doesn't exist. And so yes, if you have a bad reputation, there's a very good chance you've got a bad reputation because you've done multiple things wrong. It's not just because you did one thing and everybody started talking about you. But that's just a daft thing to write.
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of confabulation maybe.
Yeah.
Happening here. Like, I can't prove it, but I do think there are certainly some promoters who will not book you if you do not sell enough tickets the first time they ask you, right?
But that's them.
That's not a black. That's
basic.
That's not a blacklist. But you could argue that is getting blacklisted by that promoter, right?
That promoter, but that's
not
in-house.
But it's not like a whole. There's not a network.
This is making the claim that there's like a shadowy, like one would presume a spreadsheet with a column for each venue to enter their grievance next to that artist's name. Colour coded.
I hope the fuck that's not true, but
because you are none more black.
Yeah. Fuck.
No, but I understand how that's an appealing idea, but it doesn't exist. Because the machinations of how these promoters interact with each other are nothing like that. And as I say, some of these promoters are not even on talking terms. So it just doesn't exist like that.
I just also want to say that it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the moon landing conspiracy as well. It's like so many folk would have to keep shut up for so long that eventually somebody would
Nobody's leaked the blacklist to the press.
Like, there's not a single person who would, like, if this blacklist existed, there'd be a lot of people who have grievances with their former employers that would be like, actually, fucking, I'm going to publish this blacklist on Instagram or something.
So there's a separate but sort of slightly related quote where it goes, in Glasgow, Mackay explains acts are almost like stock, quote, owned by promoters they work with. And then there's a quote, I didn't realise coming into the music scene that you start working with someone and suddenly you're part of that gang. And what he's suggesting is that you're a 432 band, you're a PCL band, you're a DF band. And you know what?
Can I just be one of the bands, please?
Further up the ladder, yeah, there is a certain amount of territoriality, whereas if you go in and book someone that's clearly working with somebody consistently, they might take umbrage to it. But you're not owned by that unless they have you on some kind of contract, right? It's like, let's be serious about it. I book bands all the time that work with all of these promoters, and not one of these promoters has ever said an adverse word to me about doing it. If you book someone that's about to play a big gig for someone, then yes, they will be pissed off at you and at the band for agreeing to it. Again, that's common sense. But this notion that you're like completely confined, there probably are exceptions, people who are incredibly loyal to a specific promoter, but they are the exceptions to the rule, right? Not the rule. So again, that is spun into something that's totally outsized. And I will say just a final criticism of this before we move on. Clearly, some of the people from the venues mentioned have been in touch with the Bell, because I think you noticed that they'd published a correction. They had corrected the wildly inaccurate assertion that Nice and Sleazy couldn't be hired by members of the public, inferring that it was thus, quote, not insulated from the blacklist's influence, which, first of all, is a pretty bold claim and a little bit damning. but it's not true, so it's rightly changed. But the notion that Nice and Sleazy wasn't allowing people to play because of some non-existent shared blacklist of Glasgow promoters is farcical.
Yeah.
But also, Nice and Sleazy is very much available for hire. It regularly gets hired, including by myself, right?
I've been trying to hide it for the last year and a half.
Because it's in demand.
That's my problem.
Because it's in demand. So it's not doing any favours for that venue at a tough time for all venues for you to be publishing the completely erroneous claim that it's not for hire. It's very much for hire, and that is an inaccuracy that has actual financial consequences for an independent venue.
They've since corrected that, of course.
They have. But again, it speaks to a little bit of a lack of diligence in the run-up to publishing this that I think they should have done better on.
Yeah.
But anyway, look, one more quote, because we're going to run some numbers here. The Bell includes this passage. Mackay had hung around the scenes since he was a teenager, and had heard horror stories about DF's treatment of acts. The offer had piqued Mackay's interest. However, he'd become tired of people asking why Doss didn't work with DF. Then Doss asked DF about the fee. It turned out to be £30 for a supporting slot. The band were furious. I was like, fuck that, man. Fair enough, £30,
Well, that's what I've said to them.
Yeah, exactly. So the likes for the article, the outpouring of bad blood, totally remarkable when this went up. We wanted to get a sense of where it was coming from, just how poor is the potential income from a Tut show. Does that email you had for 2 years ago still reflect it? And maybe more importantly, how does it compare within the context of Glasgow? Are criticism of Tut shows any more merited than others? What are the methods Tuts employs that others don't? And what does that tell or not tell about the potential impacts of the fact that they're a subsidiary of Live Nation? So again, while this bit of the show is going to be a bit quite Glasgow specific, I hope we can at least make a more universal point, say, of encouraging folks to question received wisdom, looking into the data when stories like this come out, as we've just illustrated, both with the inaccuracies and with the subsequent, things like, right, this is what they pay, but what does everybody pay? How does that compare? Don't just be outraged at that, but where does that sit in the landscape? So
yeah, I mean, a lot of things that DF do at King Tut's are echoed in certainly different promoters in this city do something similar. I'm sure it's going to be the same out with this city and other cities as well. Was
that not one of the responses of DF? Is like, have you asked the same questions of other promoters?
Yeah, that's in the article. The thing our representative had said that why have you asked this of 432 and PCL? And as far as we're aware, the practice of saying offer a guarantee versus ticket split or guarantee and ticket split,
and
is, I'm sure that practice is quite common throughout most major cities in the UK, and I'm sure many promoters employ it because it does seem to be a fairly standard thing when you're promoting at a certain level.
Well, as we mentioned, I think the norms of a city are dictated by the market, and I think there'll be cities in the UK and out with that are far worse, where it's a norm to pay and play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But okay, guys, you're unsung boys here. We set up a theoretical gig. We'll call the main band for this the Bell Ends in honour of this subject and article. We hope Jeff doesn't mind us stealing his idea for a band name. In this experiment, we aimed for small to medium venues. So small, really. King Tut's has a given standing capacity of 300. So we messaged a multitude of venues around Glasgow coming in on or under the 300 capacity number. Most of them replied. A few did not, albeit we did this quite quickly, so we'll give the ones that did not the benefit of the doubt and assume that they almost certainly will get back to us in time. Now, in terms of other aspects of this, the Music Venues Trust Report of 2025, huge survey of the UK, said that the average ticket prices for a show in this sector of the market is £11.56. So we've rounded that up to £12. First of all, for mathematical ease, but also to account for the likely rise in that this year in the next survey. We're going to imagine two main scenarios here. You sell 50 tickets and you sell 100 tickets, and we'll use that to test sort of profitability. We told the venues that the gig was going to be in mid-February, but we said that we were flexible in the dates because some venues have a different rate for midweek and weekend shows, and we wanted to kind of factor that in. And we also, this is my design because I'm just uneasy with some of the capacities that are being quoted by some of the venues here, and just in terms of good practice, I usually deduct 20 from a capacity to allow for band members, various hangers-on, staff, promoters, things like that. If a room is busy at 100 I don't also want to jam in 20 undeclared people into that room and suddenly make things really uncomfortable. So all of the totals that they gave us are minus 20. Ultimately, we gathered as much data on base costs, what was included, additional charges, both stated and hidden. And yeah, we've also kind of made a few notes on some of these things based on our own DIY experience, things that could lead to extra cost. We factored in, for example, I think a very modest budget of 50 quid that includes getting some posters printed, buying a case of beer for the band, and maybe getting some like foods. You know, most gigs you'll have like hummus and chips and carrots and that kind of stuff sitting about, right? So you get 50 quid on all of these costs to provide for the bands that are playing for you. For folks that know Glasgow, we have looked at Audio, the Audio Lounge, Ivory Blacks, Nice and Sleazy's, both upstairs and down, which are leased out separately. Hired out separately. The 1990, formerly known as Broadcast under new ownership, the Rum Shack, Stereo, Hug and Pint, the Old Hairdressers, and Rocco's, which is under Lucky Strike.
Venue.
We didn't get info in time from some others, including Poetry Club, Glad Cafe, and The Attic. But yeah, so how did these venues do? I guess it's what everyone wants to know, especially if you're a promoter in Glasgow or a band in Glasgow thinking about putting on your own thing. How much do you as a promoter have left after you've paid the higher cost, that £50 that we spoke about, any additional charges for various things? Please bear in mind that our figures for 50 sales, that is combined between 3 acts, okay? In order, best to worst. The best performing venue for 50 sales, and it turns out for 100 sales, was Rum Shack on the south side of Glasgow. You basically walked away after all the costs with anything up to around £470 to split depending on the length of the event, because they don't actually charge a higher fee, they charge the engineer's hourly rate. After them, it was Sleazy's upstairs. You walk away with about 400, depending on some details around start time and stewarding, which can kind of cost you a wee bit extra. Old Hairdressers were also, you walked away with about 400. Audio Lounge, you walked away with about 370. In 1990, you walked away with about 370 as well, although they charge you for the use of the house kit, so that's contingent on you taking your full backline, which we kind of assumed that we were doing for the sake of this.
And if you need us to provide a full backline, we can do that. Under duress.
I could probably provide multiple, the amount of junk I've got sent about. Rocco's, 350 you walked away with. Sleazy's Basement, bigger venue than the upstairs, around 330, again provided you don't need their backline, which was a kind of sizable hire. And also again dependent on factors like, do you need stewarding, do you need extra time, an early load or things like that. Ivory Blacks, you end up with £300, but again, to be fair to them, they had a full backline included in that. Hug and Pint, £300 as well. Much smaller venue, but I think it did say that there was some aspects of backline that could be included, although it didn't specify. Stereo, big venue, biggest one on this apart from Tut's. You end up with between about £230 and £300 after the setup costs, as long as you keep things simple. They had multiple additional potential charges, including things like cleaning, cloakrooms, stewarding, things like that. So you had to be careful that you were covering all your bases when you were booking or arranging that one.
Can you just let the folk know what stewarding actually is?
Stewarding is security. Yeah, so most bars will have stewards on the door. But depending on the nature of your event, you might need additional stewarding, and additional stewarding was charged to the promoter, not to the bar. And the bottom of the list, I want to kind of qualify this a bit, was Audio. You end up with about 230, but there's a few kind of caveats to that. They were extremely upfront. They were the first place to get back to us with an exceptionally good, clear package of what was included. They were very upfront about things like VAT and PRS, the PRS charges. And yeah, a low kind of potential walkaway amount for that higher fee, but a really pretty good service in terms of our inquiry. Now, it actually held for 100 as well, so these stats more or less stayed the same. There's one exception to that. Assuming that each of those bands, we said there's 50 people combined between 3 bands, right? Assuming that each band brings about 15 to 20 of those 50 people, we can kind of roughly compare that to Tut's. So their £30 base rate versus a share of tickets, let's say your ticket against 12 and Tut's give you 5 of that, okay? Which I think is probably close to the truth. That means 15 sales gets you 75 quid. And even that, I do want to be clear, it's provided you don't go and sell those tickets to your mammy at cost price, which I think we've established that a lot of people do.
Yeah, I mean, I did every single time I played touch, which was twice in my life. That's exactly what I did.
Yeah, so
didn't
you're
make any money from it.
Exactly. You're selling a ticket for 12, you have to give them, let's say, 7. Quite often with your close family, you don't feel right taking that extra money, so you'll say, look, you just give me 7 for it, and that's fine.
And as a younger band, that's something you're much more likely to do as well, because you're not too worried, you're not thinking too much about cost probably. You want people that you love to come and see you play, you know, so like these tickets are supposed to be 12 quid, but for you, they're only 8, you know, or 7 or whatever, you know.
So for what it's worth, DF Concerts do claim that over 80% of artists that play the venue make above that £30 minimum, right?
Whatever that means.
Yeah. So as I say, 100 sales, it more or less held for 100 sales. Audio Lounge was the only change to that, given that their official capacity was 80, and when we subtracted the 20 for safety's sake, that meant 60 sales. So really they maxed out way below our second threshold. Just out of curiosity, I wanted to check the potential profitability of capacity. So let's say your gig was exceptionally good. How would you fare? So 100 sales, like onwards up to capacity. The picture really changed. If you think your event is going to be a big deal, basically, the higher capacity of places like Stereo, Audio, Ivory Blacks generated much more potential income. I also decided to run a disaster scenario. This was just an afterthought, but I thought, based on our experiences of life and being in bands, I was like, no, that's probably quite applicable.
Yeah.
What happens if only 20 people buy tickets in total? By the way,
I've all been there.
20 people isn't all that bad in some nights, right? Uh-huh. If you've booked more than a handful of shows in your life, you're probably already acquainted with the feeling of dread when you open the doors and there's nobody queuing.
Yep.
You have to go into the bar and be like, that's us open, and like 2 folks stand up. Or you're near the front door and you keep seeing people coming down the street, and then you're like, when they walk by.
Is the fear of that, which is why I don't like putting on gigs.
That's why I stopped. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. So 20 sales, well, 7 of the 11 venues that we looked at led to a loss by the promoter. So you're paying to put that gig on that night.
That's my worst nightmare.
Yeah, and we've all, I would assume, have had that experience of going to the cash line.
Mm-hmm.
I can't let this, I mean, you're making a loss, but let's be clear, you're making a loss and you're handing the band nothing. The fact is, very few promoters will let a band leave with no cash at all. It's a kind of measure of character.
Yeah.
If you're like, guys, I'm really sorry, this was a disaster. Here's like 30 or 40 quid from my own pocket each. Sorry about that. Like, I have been at the cash line getting a couple of hundred out of my bank to try and apologise to people.
That happened to me with an American band in fucking the 13th Note. I had to pay them pretty much most of it out of my own pocket.
Yeah.
Well, I was co-promoting it with a guy in Aberdeen who ended up not coming down to do the gig with me, but just wiled me all the money. It was like, I'm sending this to your bank account, just give it to the band. And then the band also lied about their per diem payout. Like, they doubled it, like, in front of me, right in front of me. And I was like, well, I'm fucked, I have to pay them. I can't not pay them, you know, so.
Brutal.
It was brutal, man. That band, I still really like that band, but that was the worst experience I've had.
I put on a 9-piece Chinese post-rock band, and 9 people turned up for the show. They were fucking brilliant, man. They did, like, apparently back home they played to like thousands of people a night, and they did like at the end of the gig in this tiny wee venue to 9 people, if there were even 9 people by the end, they did this thing where they stood in a line and did one of those joined arm kind of bows like you would in a giant arena.
Wow.
It was absolutely brutal.
You can't even get 9 folk on the stage.
No, this was in Captain's Rest.
Oh, even also in Captain's Rest.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the other 4 of the 11 saw a modest income. Audio Lounge, you walked away with a tenner. If you can split a tenner 3 ways. Old Hairdresser and Sleazy's upstairs, you had about 40 quid. And the Rum Shack, as we mentioned, which was the best performing of the 50 sales, you had a respectable sort of between £50 and £110 due to the low overheads. So if you were giving the bands whatever you could, you at least weren't dipping into your own pocket for it, but it was still quite grim stuff overall. Some observations and things to consider for those results. If you as a band have a very limited draw, there is an argument that doing something like a Tut's ticket thing is easier and lower risk. First of all the man hours that go unpaid for putting on a gig, you're not doing that. Really, you're walking away with, let's say, £4 or £5 a ticket. It's a really small amount of money, but it's better than going to a cash line, right? But if you have any substantial draw, or you have a stacked bill where 3 or 4 bands want to play, you really need to consider going DIY, club together, team up, combine your resources and go and get a decent amount of money on the door. Combining crowds as well, be mindful of whether your crowds overlap a lot when you're doing those kind of things.
I think the thing with King Tut's as well is like you would imagine for all of their like near infinite resources that they'd be pretty good at marketing the gigs that they ask you to play as well, but they are just not.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that a lot of promoters will include marketing in their expenditure. I am not sure what a part of DF Concerts or King Tut's budget for the smaller shows that plays, because I don't see a lot of it. No. It seems to be left to the bands themselves. Anyway, it's also worth noting that when we are trying to be fair to King Tut's and places like it, places like Audio here, DIY promoters rarely, if ever, declare their VAT, their VAT, right? And so that is 20% of your takings. That's 1/5 of your ticket sales that you're able to hold on to that the big promoters won't be. So that's not exactly a level playing field in that sense. In relation to things like the top end potential and sellable capacity, I would be very mindful, this is my personal opinion as a promoter, of some of the given capacities.
Yes,
I don't think they're right. I think some of these capacities I would maybe take issue with stereo. I think their claim of 300 is it's problematic. First of all, because the lines of sight, it's to do with like how you draw your lines of sight on the map of their floor. I don't think it's anything like that, and I think that when 300 people want to see the stage, they start cramming around the edges of that pillar and it becomes a wee bit uncomfortable, dare we even say unsafe. So be careful of venues that claim an inflated capacity, and I think there's probably a few in that list that are guilty of it. Yes, that may be the absolute maximum human bodies that can get into that room, but does it make for a nice night? Does it make for a comfortable show? Especially if you start adding in members of staff and things like that on top of it. Your gig should be good, your gig should be safe. That experience still matters, and I think one thing that's got lost in amongst the kind of economic austerity of the industry is the quality of the show. You should enjoy being there. It shouldn't be an ordeal, and I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to some gigs in some of these venues which were, I don't want to use the word dangerously oversold, but
I've been to gigs that were dangerously oversold. I've seen a few bands stop playing because they were so annoyed at how oversold the venue was.
And I think that I don't like saying dangerously oversold because it means that there's a certain culpability there that the venue are being negligent, essentially. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think I've mentioned before,
in that room if it's sold out.
Being at an Northern Punisher show where a girl next to me passed out just because it was such a crush and then had to be carried out over the crowd because they couldn't get her out. So it's things like that should not be happening at shows.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had that in a few of the smaller venues in Glasgow for sure. So.
I also think the sound quality is a big thing when you're doing these. King Tut's, in fairness, as we said, has a very good sound system, right? So we have to give them credit where it's due. I think places like Sleazy's have a terrific sound system.
Probably the best in the city.
I would say for its size, best in the city, aye. There's others, again, maybe stereo. I think the sound system's under spec for the room. There's probably a couple that are guilty of that. So when you're putting these things on, consider that as a factor in these prices.
I would say the hairdressers is probably a bit under spec for the room as well.
It's very no frills. It's certainly the production values of the lighting are quite low as well. I think you've also got to consider location. How easy or how difficult is it going to be to get people to that part of town? Audio Lounge is one of those, way up in Maryhill, so it's okay, those are good prices, but how are you getting there and how are you getting back? How safe is it? And I think, and I want to be careful my wording here, right, because safety is an issue with some of these places, both in terms of capacity and both in terms of things like security and stuff like that. I absolutely love DIY shows. I know you do as well. I've been all over the squat scene in Western Europe. I love those kind of gigs.
Who doesn't have a house show? Do you know what I mean? It's just one of the most beautiful things in the world.
However, there is no escaping the fact that not so long ago, some Looney Tune from Maryhill, which is the extremely edgy part of Glasgow where the venue is situated. By the way, it's a very hard venue to get to. Some Looney Tune from Maryhill wandered into a packed show waving a blade around, waving a knife around. Now, in the end, thankfully nobody was hurt, but there were no security there to handle it. Trained security staff. It was a room full of kids. In fairness to these other venues, when we are doing comparisons of price, the venue owners will be screaming at me here, saying, we have to pay for security staff. That costs money. Well, it does cost money. In places that don't do that, that's a saving they're making. So again, when there is a discrepancy in these higher prices, like, how come they can do it so good and they can't? Well, they've got a considerable security bill. 7 or 8 hours for a security team is really expensive, I can tell you that. and that has to get paid. And over 365 days of a year, you're talking 5-6 figures for that kind of thing that the other places might not be spending. So please don't be too judgmental until you've considered those factors as well, right? I mean, King Tut's has, again, I'm not going to bat for them, but they have a considerably large security team in there, including some listeners to this podcast, who look after the fans and the gig goers every night. Okay, so we do need to try and not get carried away by the outrage at the bottom line figures before we consider these factors. That doesn't mean you can't still be outraged at these figures. I am officially now outraged at those figures.
Now that we've seen them, I think I'm definitely in the same But mindset.
I'm trying to be as fair as possible in and around that. Okay.
I think, it's very important to have that.
I mean, there's licenses as well, it's like venues have fire safety regulations, they have drink safety regulations, they have a lot of different regulations. Just recently, I'm sure some people saw it, the video of a club in Bangkok that erupted in flames spontaneously, just suddenly, due to materials that were used in that club. Now, in terms of you putting on those shows, Mark, you know as well as I do, if you are putting on these gigs and you're comparing these venues, like you said, things like Tuts and stuff are probably actually not too bad if you're expecting a very modest amount of people to turn up. Don't go hiring out a room for hundreds of pounds if that's your limit. You need to be realistic about your gig sales, which a lot of people, including ourselves, have found out the hard way. So, I mean, we said 50 and 100. That's a lot.
Yeah, if I ever get £100 at people at a show, I'll be so happy.
If only, right? So it maybe isn't a lot when you're 19 and your entire class is up for getting smashed.
Your entire clan,
and your parents and your aunties and your schoolmates all want to come and see you. But when you get into your 30s, it gets a little bit harder. People have children and mortgages and jobs. And I mean, even at a younger age, it's quite seasonal because exams come around. You get summer and winter breaks from university. It clashes with really big shows in the city. If you're trying to run a place sustainably, you can't afford huge disasters like that. Be realistic about these shows. Don't get yourself into debt. Don't contribute to the pressure that you're putting on yourself and the resentment you can start to build up against these places. Another one is location. We've talked about this a few times. It's a huge issue facing Glasgow. I mean, the transport infrastructure here is atrocious. This is a big, big problem in Glasgow. It's probably not as big a problem in your city because I really do think we're exceptionally bad. Our subway shuts at 6 p.m. on a Sunday,
which is obscene.
Fucking 17.50 or something like that, right? You can be sure that is taking a bite out of Sunday evening shows, for example, right? Especially with the weather that you have in Scotland. So if you're a booker, venues like audio and stereo have strong transport benefits in terms of the reliability of who's going to be able to get to your show. If you're planning for it, it's like, well, okay, bad weather's not going to be as big an issue if you're booked in audio or stereo. Whereas the Rum Shack, for example, further south, kind of out the way, a wee bit isolated, it's a wee bit harder to get to.
Well, I mean, the train station right behind it, but you need to transfer in town to get
exactly. And likewise, bustling areas, former bustling areas like Sauchiehall Street have suffered so many years in neglect now. Location is a factor, so consider that as well. So and I actually touched, there's something else that popped into my head towards the end of doing the build up to this, Mark, and I touched on it earlier on. Musicians Union.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's really interesting that they've softened their stance towards collaborative gigs. They used to be they arguably still are very against pay-to-play shows, but the idea of asking bands to sell tickets for the shows, they've adopted a softer attitude to that now. As long as they have a caveat, as long as fair percentages are afforded to the bands. But as a perverse little undertaking, I wanted to find out how much Musicians Union national gig rate recommendations would cost, right? Because the Musicians Union, we spoke about the logic of it, right? So they advise session players. I think a lot of the time it's sort of aimed at trad players, classical players, jazz players. They have an advisory list for live performance. Now, I think if you actually sat and had a pint with anyone from the MU, they would say, oh, yeah, we understand that these rates don't apply to a wee band playing a gig in a pub. And what I would suggest is, or what I would ask is, why not? Now, I get that they don't. I get that that's totally unfeasible, but why not? What is the logic there? Why are these indie bands not qualifying for the same level of treatment and reward as the session players. So, what are the results of that? We said 3 bands, let's say 4 people in each, it's 12 people. Musicians Union gig rate, 167 minimum fee for up to 3 hours performance. That brings it straight away up to a total of £2,006, right? Guitar, bass and drum porterage at the lowest level, because drums are actually more, £41 each, okay? That's £492 porterage on top. $37.50 for each person that gets home after midnight. Let's take a gamble and say that's pretty much all of them, right? But £450 added for that. £68.50 is the recommended rate for a per diem. You know, the food, the money that you get for your day out at a show. That's £790, all right? The total, before we even get into travel expenses, which are like £13 an hour pro rata, 56p a mile, all that stuff, before we even get into that, you're at £3,738 for 3 bands of 4 people based on their recommended rates. Not a single venue that we spoke about up to 300 capacity, even sold out on a £12 ticket, can touch that. I'm being kind of bloody minded in that, but I do think there's an interesting 2-tier, oh God, I hate that phrase, but in current context, but there's a duality going on here where serious musicians are expecting serious money, which is clearly either super expensive tickets, because in some cases you had to double the ticket price to even get to that. So you're talking £24 for a local gig, right?
Yeah, nobody's paying £24 to see 3 local bands. It's not going to happen.
I mean, people are trying it.
Yeah.
There are venues in the city creeping up towards it, but what is the value system here? I just don't get that.
Well, part of it's going to be in relation to like living wage and cost of living crisis and all that. Do you know what I mean? Like that's why they're going to be setting their fees like that. So actually, you can actually make a living from doing it. But
no, I get it.
But it's not realistic.
Exactly, it doesn't translate at all. And there's a weird thing where in Musicians Union, they probably wonder why so few people feel connected to them. It's so irrelevant to the experience of most typical gigging bands. It's not even like the venues are withholding that money. That money isn't even changing hands on a sold-out gig at those venues. If they gave 100% of the takings, it still wouldn't be enough to meet those rates. And how do you expect people to feel like that's meant for them?
Yeah.
It's odd. But yeah, and anyway, it all brings me to, I think, something that was apparent from those threads as we start to kind of like draw this to a close. Misconceptions about concerts, venues and profit. And reading, if not even just the article, but the comments that were underneath it, more so, the wider understanding.
I was one of them.
Yeah, you were indeed, at least one of them. The wider understanding of profitability or otherwise of music venues in the live music industry is evidently really poorly understood, I would suggest. The public does seem to acknowledge that there is a lot of strife within the music industry, but it's unable to continue that logic through to the financial well-being of the venues themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, the bands are getting fucked over, and that is true, by the way. I am one of those bands, and I'm also a promoter, and I'm also helping to run a venue, and nobody is getting fucking rich from just that simple act. Certainly not at that part of the market. Promoters and venues are very much still the oppressors, you know, the bourgeoisie in the eyes of a lot of the people posting and commenting, and certainly some of them are. Live Nation most definitely is an oppressor. It most definitely is the bourgeoisie. But the industry overall is in crisis, and that affects everyone. So we've addressed the reason for this crisis, or crises really, on numerous other episodes, right? We also discussed this with Mark David on the MVT episode that we did recently. Payment for bands is dire. Costs facing bands are growing, and growing rapidly in some cases, but that's also true of the venues. The running costs have skyrocketed. I mean, April of this year, for some venues, their business rates trebled.
Yep.
Overnight. Trebled overnight. So to give, I think, just one example of a part of the industry that venues face, post-COVID, there was a massive skills gap in a lot of industries, right, including music. Live music was decimated during the pandemic. A lot of engineers left the industry and retrained, right? Those that stayed became hugely in demand, oversubscribed, you could say, and realised they also needed financial security because their industry could collapse overnight when a disease started spreading. Meanwhile, the mid-level echelons were starved suddenly of, you know, experienced and affordable engineering staff. And those sort of like increased costs reverberate all the way through the industry when you suddenly can't get engineering staff and their costs double, for example. So even at the larger end of the scale as well, I don't want to say it's only about the small venues. Like, you go to the Hydro, you think you sell 8,000 tickets for the Hydro, like you've made a mint, right? Well, no, you haven't made a mint. And I am not, again, throwing myself to the defence of the Hydro or anybody that uses that, right? But bigger shows have exponentially higher costs, right? They can bring huge profits, but they can also bring huge losses. So like the Hydro and the ACCC as well, they're like corporate venues a lot of times, so their costs are even higher, even more at a premium. And if you make 8,000 sales at a Hydro gig, you're taking a bath. Someone is taking a bath. And in Glasgow, the lack of a venue actually between the Hydro and the Academy, which is about 2,700, the lack of a venue between that sometimes leads to people taking a big risk on the Hydro that they really shouldn't be taking. The Hive's definitely one of those.
Yeah, when you tried that.
Yeah, I'm not going to cry myself to sleep for Live Nation losing a few quid, or the Hives, or Pantera, for example, right? Fuck Live Nation, fuck Phil Anselmo. No, fuck the Hives, but what the fuck were they thinking trying to book the Hydro? It's a place that can hold up to 16,000 people, and it had to get moved.
They booked that in Sweden, but they can't book that here.
Yeah. I'm not going to lose any sleep necessarily about those big companies struggling, right? But I'm extremely concerned about sustainability of small shows. Broadly speaking, small venues are not, and I repeat, not getting rich from gigs. And neither are small scale promoters. If they're lucky, they make a modest profit. More likely, they're part of that 53.8% that made an overall loss, or at least no profit in the last financial year. That Music Venues Trust large-scale survey of grassroots music venues, these small places, reported an average profit margin of 2.5% and actual financial profit of just over £30,000 for a full year for a venue. Just over £30,000 for the whole venue, average. Now, clearly, that's average. Some places are doing really well, but they are in the minority now. Other places are losing money. And as I say, 53.8% making no profit whatsoever. Owners taking nothing out of their company because they just need to keep the doors open. And actually, the smaller the venue, the worse the chances there, because those in the lowest category were making an average loss of 2.1% a year, which is unsustainable. They're just going to vanish. That's what's going to happen there. And yeah, there are some really crucial facts within that the public and people that are their blood is up about this stuff need to be aware of, right? Sales of tickets only account for 32% of income on average. The rest is 68%. That's mostly drinks and, food, and maybe to a very negligible extent merchandise of the venue and stuff like that. Music events in isolation lost money nationwide, with the shortfall being made up from the bar, from those other revenue sources. I think it was like Scotland alone, the overall loss on tickets was 6.5 million. And so that's like £95,000 a venue.
It's crazy,
losing money on tickets, but making it back up clearly, or trying to make it back up through the people in the venue, then going and having a bevy. But that's also one reason that, there was that talk about promoters that own the venues. And clearly it's in the interest of a promoter to own a venue, because they can sell the tickets, maybe do okay out of that, maybe take a small loss. But the point is they can then sell at the bar. So if you sell 100 tickets and you have the bar and 100 people go and spend £8 at your bar, then you've done all right. You've got another £800 over the bar, and that's probably your main revenue source for that night. Right, so, and especially when you get percentage deals where the bands get paid more depending on how many tickets get sold. If you own the revenue in the bar, that is the secret. That is the model, right? And it's also why at the Hydro, the company selling 8,000 tickets can make a massive loss, but the Hydro can still sell 8,000 people £8 a pint pints. You know what I mean? That's a crazy system where they can still have a very good night without really that much risk as a result of that. And it also shows that really the small promoters who don't own the bars are the ones that are probably at the most risk there, along with the bands, because they're relying just on the ticket sales. Yeah. They don't have that safety net of, we'll try and shift some drinks to them. But yeah, it goes to say, right, to really wrap that up, with regards to King Tut's and DF concerts, who, they've been the focus of our ire. What's clear is that there's an increasing gulf in how Tuts and DF Concerts, and especially Jeff Ellis, from his comments, see their role versus maybe how the local scene sees it now, how it sees their venue. Is that naive? Yes. Is it maybe to be expected when you're owned and somewhat subservient to the world's largest corporate music provider? It probably is, that you lose touch a little bit with the scene and the roots that you thought you had. Live Nation recorded 25 billion, more than 25 billion in global revenue for the last financial year. Its profits are sickening, really, in the context of a struggling industry. That said, Live Nation UK reported a loss, and it has done since 2012. But they own DF and thus King Tut's indirectly, and clearly don't feel compelled to pour money into Tuts from other parts of the business.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, because, you know, their accounts, which you can find online for last year, they don't break it down as to how much money King Tut's is making or losing. You know, it just is part of their concerts.
Regardless of that, though, regardless of that apparent lack of like downward investment from the parent company, King Tut's is a bar as well. And if they are bringing 100 kids in, as somebody that can run a venue on that kind of budget, you can afford to be a little bit more generous than £30. Yeah, you can afford to even strike a purely ticketed deal. I mean, even if they did that, it said, right, here's a much better ratio of sales for these kind of like summer nightsy gigs. Why are you keeping any of it?
Yeah, exactly. You know, there should definitely be some more options in place for artists that want to take different kind of approaches to how they want to sell gigs in that venue, you know, because clearly they own the building, right? They must own it, given how long they fucking had it for, right? So that's not an issue, paying for that. All the rest is overheads and everything else. Removing, even if we just remove the almost 8 million that Live Nation gave to the DF Concerts made last year, right? I do find it quite difficult to believe that they can't put that up just from, like you said, just from money across the bar. It feels like they're lying.
Even, as I said, hopefully people agree that I've gone out and I've tried to really understand the poverty of the industry here, and even with that poverty in mind, it's really, really hard to make any justification for those rates. Now, everyone can draw their own conclusions about how sincerely King Tut's truly values the health of the local scene from that.
By the way, can I just add something before you can finish that point? Their competitors in the city offer better deals.
Yeah, they do.
All of them.
They do. And I think especially in terms of the health of their scene, how much it values the niche genres and the margins of that, the parts of the scene that don't really seem to be represented, right? So there is a resentment, there is an outpouring of ire, and even though there are aspects of King Tut's predicament that I understand and appreciate and want to be generous about, it's really hard to square the circle of like, guys, like, you deserve this criticism. You do. It's just that you're bringing this on yourself with your practices. And I mean, from a personal perspective, I certainly disagree as a promoter with the kind of crassness of the summer nights, New Year Revolution kind of model, you know, jamming often quite mismatched acts onto a bill and jamming families into the pub with no real sense of like pairing stuff up or building them up. It's just like, this is a quiet time of the year. We absolutely need to generate revenue. So you've got a band playing at the start of January who can't play for all of December or all of January into February. You've got a band playing in the middle of you're talking like cutting 4 months out of the year. That's a third of the year you're cutting out for some of these bands. I mean, it's mental. I'm sure it's not intentional, but it's an act of hostility to the other promoters in the city as well. We say, you know, you talk about this band's off limits. Well, if you've got them signed up like that and a really good support slot comes up, and the bands are having to like grovel to you and say, please, can we do this show in our own town? That is just not a good look. Like, no wonder people are getting pissed off at you, not just the bands. But they're not the only venue engaged in that sort of enterprise, but I do think they're the main offender in it. They're part of a low-level economy that's in free fall. I get that, but they've got a lot of the same problems that are affecting other small venues. But they've got other strings to their bow. They've got a ticketing company that owns the venue. You've got ways to generate drinks revenue. They've taken themselves out of the equation of being a pub. They don't seem approachable. If they're wondering why the place sits empty all the time, try and work out what it is you've done that make people not want to go and drink in there anymore, and try and address that. And yeah, I mean, I would point out as a closing thought here, as a rival promoter, I don't consider myself a rival because we have worked with them at times and I spent a lot of time in there over my life. I've got friends there. But in terms of the potential for them to draw, people were saying, the solution to this is for DF Concerts and Live Nation to reinvest in Tuts and improve these payments. I honestly don't want them to do that. I don't. If Tuts is going to offer better terms, they should offer better terms based on the means at their disposal and the cash flow at their disposal, right? Because if they start getting investments down the way for these companies, every independent venue in this city is going to be unable to compete. Every independent venue at this city is going to be at a disadvantage, and over time they will lose gigs purely because King Tut's has a corporate owner. So if you're on those forums and on those threads saying, DF and Live Nation should be paying money into King Tut's, careful what you wish for, because what you're wishing for is them to get money that nobody else has to give artificial prices. And yes, great, for like a year and a half you'll be getting a little bit more for your guarantee at the start of that gig, right, or at the end of that gig. But a year and a half down the line, Sleazy's will be shut, or Hug and Pint will be shut, or these other small venues that don't have that facility will be shut because they couldn't draw upon a corporate overlord to pay and inflate those fees. So if you are on there posting, just in this subject in general, in fact, whether you work at the Bell, whether you're Jeff in a fucking tantrum, whether you're some daft guy just steaming onto a thread and insulting people, just consider what you're saying a bit more. Consider the moving parts. Consider where everybody else is coming from, and be careful what you wish for as well.
Yeah, well, I think the money that they've got to play with potentially is potentially ruinous to the city's grassroots scene.
You just end up with a pure homogenised, like, all these small venues couldn't afford to compete. They got their pick of all the shows, and soon the independent alternative niche stuff that they don't feature anyway was gone, had no outlet because the independent venues couldn't compete. Yep. And so the bands that wanted like an extra 70 quid on their guarantee got it, but actually there was no scene to speak of left around that. It's like they do have the ability to pay more, but they have the ability to pay more from the means and the cash flow they have. Yeah. Please stop asking them to take that money from Live Nation, because that is not a route that we want to go down.
Okay, well, hopefully we put some noses out of joint with that, as we are wont to do.
Oh goodness, yeah.
But
I'm going to go upstairs and throw myself into the sinkhole. It'll be the safest place to be.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with something else.
You want something nice and easy to do?
And we're back in a couple of weeks with Coil.
We'll bring in Phil. Phil will at least lift the mood, but Coil will do their best to sully it.
I bumped into you on Saturday and you said I look sad. It's because I was listening to Coil.
I went out shopping on Saturday and listened to 3 hours of Coil documentaries. Sunday and listened to 3 hours of Coil documentaries and had to stop for a pint.
Brutal. Anyway, I'm sure it'll be fun. It'll be nice to see Phil. So
it'll be lovely to see Phil.
Enjoy that. Enjoy this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share and subscribe, and hopefully you'll enjoy Phil Coil Exodus.
Have we put our complaints number line up?
Yes, unsungbomb@gmail.com. But yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Just take a breath if you're out there. Take a breath.
Take a breath.